It's Talk Funny, a podcast by Mark Bailey and other comics from all over. We ended up in Japan because we have our finger on the pulse of Japan. Oh wait, that's not our finger. The Talk Funny podcast from Nagoyaradio.com and Nagoyacomedy. Here's Mark Bailey.
Here's Mark Bailey.
Welcome back to another edition of Talk Funny. I'm Mark Bailey. We're here with Steve Howard once again.
Hello.
We were talking in an earlier podcast about some Netflix specials that we like and don't like. Not everybody has Netflix, but even if you don't have Netflix, there are plenty of full comedian sets that you can see on YouTube. And one of the guys that I recommended to my former roommate, hi Jim, I recommended this guy named Chris Porter. He came up in the early 90s, and I guess people like Bill Burr, Louis C.K., and Dave Chappelle just took the spotlight from him. But he's a very funny guy. And he's angry, which I like. I'm not sure. I think he's like from Kansas, but he's really angry.
Like polar opposite to you, then.
Yeah, I'm not laid back like I am. He's really angry. He's got some great stuff about phones. I mean, everything, and he just kills constantly. It's just an hour of total killing, and he's totally underrated, I think. So check him out. His name is Chris Porter. So even if you don't have Netflix, you could still probably find that. I'm pulling up online now some of the Joe Rogan guests. Not always easy for me to remember, but who are some of your favorite guests that Joe Rogan has had on his podcast?
Well, the one I recently listened to was the Henry Rollins podcast, which I think Henry Rollins has only been on twice, but they kind of covered the same topics, but they really talked a lot about how when they started out and how they just stayed focused on their career and how they kind of just really do what they love doing, and that's their job, that's their career. So it was pretty inspiring to listen to them kind of talk about that.
And every time they have, I remember one that I was kind of disappointed. Neil deGrasse Tyson, who's a fascinating, he's just an amazing teacher of what he's like, physics. He's a curator at the Science Museum or something. It's just the way he explains like string theory and cold fusion is just so easy to understand the way he explains it, which is important when you're on Joe Rogan's show because Joe Rogan is stoned out of his mind. And, you could say like, hey, did you know an elevator not only goes down, it also goes up? Whoa. It goes, can it go up and down at the same time? No, Joe, it's an elevator. But Neil deGrasse Tyson is explaining these difficult concepts very well, and Joe's just silent for like 20 minutes. I'm like, comment? And Neil deGrasse Tyson is like, well, there's a very interesting way that we're thinking of managing space junk, but we'll go into that some other time. I'm like, no, I want to know what it is, right? And Joe Rogan is just like, wow, I'm still on the elevator thing. Okay, so here's some of the guests. I don't know this one. Diamond Dallas Page, some of the guests on Joe Rogan. Tom Papa, he cooks bread. He's a comedian, and he comes on and they talk about bread. That's kind of disappointing to me. Then they have the MMA shows, the martial arts shows that I always skip. Bert Kreischer, I mentioned that one earlier. Neil deGrasse Tyson, that was the recent one. Well, we mentioned the Miscavige guy before, where he was just out of his mind. The Miscavige guy is out of his mind, and they tell these long, rambling stories. I've actually met people who have brain damage, and they go on and on and on and don't realize that they don't have a point to the story. So you have to rein them in. You go, because that David Miscavige guy, his son is like the leader of Scientology. You're afraid to say it, Scientology, and
that'll get some ratings.
Joe asked him a question like, how did your son end up becoming the head of that? So this guy will start, and then before you know it, we're on this long country road that he's talking about where the mosquitoes bite. I don't mean they bite you on your neck. I mean they bite you. Okay, we're into mosquitoes now. So the question was this. And it's like, 10 minutes in, you have to keep reining these people in. Then we had Mike Baker. He was on Joe Rogan. He's a CIA guy, and he was getting away with verbal murder, just the lies that he was spewing. And I wanted Joe to step in and go, wait a minute, can you back that up? What you just said? So I can't get the old guests here. There's so many of them. I guess I don't need his name. But there's one guy who he's really into supplements, and he was having like blood transfusions just for health. And then Joe was like, well, so does it help you? He was like, I didn't notice any difference. Like, well, you're putting your life on the line. He was taking copper supplements or something.
Wow.
And Joe's like, well, that doesn't sound good. And he goes, I got really sick from that one. I'm not going to do that again. And it's like, if only there was the internet, you could actually look this up and say, should I be eating pennies? And I can't remember that guy's name, but any disappointing guess that they've had on Rogan's show, and then we'll get to Kill Tony.
Well, Steven Tyler from Aerosmith, because I'd heard the one a long time ago when he had Joe Perry on there, and Joe Perry was pretty interesting, I thought. But Steven Tyler was, I don't know, just a little too flaky for me, I guess, a little too woo-woo.
We got two guys that are strung out talking to each other. I mean, Bill and Ted's Adventure was funnier than that, you know?
Well, the stories he was telling, of course, the ones that he could remember were pretty interesting, but when he started talking about, I always bring my crystals and stuff with me, I was like, okay.
You know, I wanted to hear about the dynamic that he's afraid of talking about. He's afraid of talking about his relationship with Joe Perry. I know they don't get along.
Yeah.
I want to hear about that, you know? I want to hear about Aerosmith.
Right.
A little bit, you know? Or even his daughter. So here's a Henry Rollins. We're looking at... I didn't hear the Macaulay Culkin episode when he was on Rogan. Here's two more MMAs. John Joseph, I don't know what that is. Sean Carroll. He'll have some... The mushroom guy was really good. The mushroom guy really blew my mind.
Stamets was...
Yeah,
that was one I didn't... I was like, mushrooms? I don't... how is this going to be interesting? But it was one of the most fascinating podcasts he's done.
How about this one? Michael Scott Moore. Did you hear this one? He was kidnapped by Somali pirates. And Joe was not asking the right questions. He was asking like, so you learned their language? He goes, yeah, I was held captive, for almost a year or something like that. And he goes, so what's their word for blue? Yeah, you know what, Joe? Who cares? Andrew Santino is another comic. The comic that when they have the comics on there, they talk about everything except comedy. Yeah. Usually. Bert Kreischer, there was a point they were talking about 20 minutes about audiences and stages and stuff that was kind of interesting, and then they went into like an hour and a half on spearfishing, which is not interesting.
I like the one when he had Jay Leno on there. It was really interesting because Leno talked about when he was doing stand-up comedy before there really was stand-up comedy, because he was talking about how it was two strippers and then I would do 5 minutes in between at some bar, and then of course talking about the mob and everything that he had to deal with, but that was another one another episode that I really liked.
Yeah, that was good. I was disappointed with the Jeff Garlin when Jeff Garlin had, of course, he was on Curb Your Enthusiasm. He's the big fat, friend of Larry Davis. He kept using big bowl of. He'd say, well, that's a big bowl of confusing. Joe, you're a big bowl of warmth, and big bowl. It's like that's after about the 30th time I couldn't listen anymore. Peter Schiff on who is brilliant on his economic theory. And Joe, here's a hint. If you're going to do a podcast and you're going to have an economist on, maybe look up some controversial points, or make him back up what he's saying.
How's old Peter's house in Puerto Rico doing?
Yeah. And Joe is just kind of like, oh, so what is this about Keynes? Listen, that's something you could have looked up, Keynesian theory. You could pretty sure that an economist might reference that. And so you're sitting right here in front of the internet, Joe. And he's like, What's the capital of Puerto Rico? It's like, I'm pretty sure that information's online. Do you do any prep at all, Joe, besides edibles? Doug Stanhope, I liked his when he was on. He's pretty much himself.
Yeah.
Tony Rock, Chris Rock's brother, which just proves that comedy is not in DNA. Tony Rock I didn't find funny at all.
Yeah.
I don't think he was even trying to be funny. I mean, you really can't outdo your brother, I guess.
Charlie Murphy was pretty funny when he was on a couple of times.
But then he passed, didn't he?
Yeah.
Theo Vaughn, this was really irritating to me because they were both going, what do you think Swedish sounds like to Swedish people? I think it just sounds like a language, you idiot. It's like, hey, do you like American? They were not being sarcastic. They were saying, do you speak American? Not everyone speaks American. I think it's English. And they weren't being sarcastic like, America. They weren't. They're just two stoned guys who didn't do, they're smoking pot because they don't like to read.
Yeah.
Then Joey Diaz, who I never... Sure, he's a nice guy. I just don't get him.
There was one, the Joey Diaz episode when he had the writer that wrote about the Cuban mob after the Cuban Missile crisis.
Oh, yeah, I didn't hear that one.
That one was pretty good, really interesting.
Here's a guy I met a guy on a plane who said he listened to Joe Rogan, and he said Duncan Trussell is like the most annoying voice. Isn't he the short guy? It's a really high-pitched voice. Ted Nugent, I think Joe Rogan let him get away with a lot of stuff.
Yeah.
Say things, and that's fine. I mean, I don't mind that you need to hear people's opinions. People say, well, shut up the Nazis. No, let them talk. I want to know who they are. Like the guy in Tokyo who walks up and goes, yeah, I have the Jewish question for you. Yeah, let me get your name and address so I know to avoid you. I say let the crazy people talk so we know how crazy they are.
Yeah.
But Joe just let Ted Nugent talk, and he could have confronted him. Ted Nugent is he'll back up his views. That would have been more interesting. Jordan Peterson, which he always just blows Joe away. He's just so much there, and I guess Joe doesn't want to make his guests angry because he wants to have them on again. But what's the point of having a show if you're going to let people grandstand?
Jordan Peterson was really interesting when he was on Sam Harris' podcast, because Sam Harris didn't let him get away with anything and called him out on it.
Yeah. We'll do a couple other. Dave Rubin, I liked when he was on.
Yeah.
Dave Rubin is someone that you could actually, have a disagreement with or something, and he'll tell you why he disagrees and won't call you names. We're getting in the SJW era now. We're getting to where he just said, well, you're a misogynist, you're a racist, and I won't have a debate with you. Like, I was kind of disappointed when Jimmy Kimmel last year, he got up and said something on gun control, and he said, if you disagree with me on gun control, I really don't want to talk to you. Well, I don't think, are we just going to, this is it? This is our country? We're just going to divide in two now? We're just never going to talk to each other again?
Yeah.
That's, as a talk show host, that's not acceptable. Boy, there's just so many Rogan stuff. So let's just talk about what impressed you recently with any Kill Tony shows that you saw on you can see these on YouTube.
The one that was pretty interesting. They were in Nashville, and there was maybe 2 comedians that were funny at all during the rest of it, and it was just Tony and Red Band. And about halfway through, they're like, "This isn't funny. It's depressing. It's like an AA meeting."
Right, and you were telling me that these guys were getting up. We probably need to explain. Kill Tony. You can find this on YouTube. It is open mic extreme. It's basically it's held in the I think it's called the Belly Room. It's in a basement of a comedy club. There's actually shows going on above, and they do a podcast. You put 300, 400 names in a hat, and they may call you to do open mic. If you put your name in the hat, you have 12 seconds to get up on stage, and then you have a minute. It starts immediately, and you can't go over time. And then they're going to rail on you on what shirt you're wearing and the way you look, and thanks for dressing up, and they're going to make fun of your appearance. And if you're lucky, they might actually even critique your comic 1-minute bit. And they have some professional comedians. They become professional by coming on there every week and doing a minute, which is a lot harder than it sounds. It has to be a solid minute. You were mentioning you had some of these guys in the Nashville episode would get up and go, yes, I'm a truck driver, and I'm not a full-time comedian. Yeah, you're an open mic. We kind of guessed that part. Was there any funny guys or any?
I mean, there was one guy that had been, I think he'd been doing stand-up for 4 years, so at least he knew not to get on stage and spend 40 seconds introducing himself before he told a joke. He went right into telling jokes. But yeah, he was probably the only one out of maybe 8 or 9 guys that got on stage that was pretty funny, so...
I'll do one more story about Joe Rogan. I remember we were talking about this at the time. A guy, they had Howard Bloom on.
Oh, yeah.
He's an author, and he was in the rock world, and Howard Bloom is God. Apparently, I mean, everything he talked about is just do you like ice cream? I invented ice cream.
Right.
It's like, do you like the word egotist? I actually invented that. And Joe was just letting him get away with bragging about everything. He was claiming that he discovered these bands that I know for a fact he did not discover. I know the people that discovered them because I was working alongside them when they were at A&M, and when I was in radio, and I know for a fact that he was, making it up. One more topic before we leave. We were talking before about the 3-year and 30-year comics and the kind of new guys like you starting up in comedy. I think one thing you guys have gotten better at is the first couple of years you were devastated at some of the audiences that turned out, some of the crowds, and the infamous show was one in November where I guess half the audience, most of the audience had come back from the racetrack or something drunk, hiking or something. They were completely drunk when the show started.
Yeah, and then rugby players, that's what it was. It was some rugby thing, so a bunch of huge drunk rugby players.
And that's where the Scottish lady too. She was very annoying. She had an annoying brogue, and they were drunk, really, really drunk and rowdy at the beginning of the show. Then they started drinking again.
Yeah,
and so afterwards, I'm like, well, they're just kind of rude. We had one guy get up and bang the cymbals during my act, and you guys are just like devastated, holding your head in your hands. And I'm like, nobody died. That was a pretty good show. It was pretty lively. And I think I mentioned to you guys at the time that at some of the shows, Logan and I did in New York, we actually received death threats from people we made fun of who turned out to be mafia guys. And at one point, one of the clubs, the bartender came up, the owner came up and said, I can't book you guys anymore because a couple of guys said they're going to come back next time you're on and put you in a trunk and you'll never be seen again. So he said, that's going to happen.